In this segment, Stephanie Miller welcomes former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti to the program. Together, they try to make heads or tails of Trump's testimony and where the case against him goes from here. Let's bring in Stephanie.
Good morning, Renato Mariotti.
Good morning. How are you?
I am okay. I am so excited to have you because it does not take a legal expert to look at yesterday in New York at this fraud trial and go, what was that? What a hot mess. I mean, once again, every legal expert I've seen, Renato, says, I've never seen anything like this in my life. This is totally up to the judge what happens here. They've already lost the fraud case, correct? Now it's just about the amount of damages, and they're going out of their way to piss the judge off. Can you explain to us what we're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. What we saw yesterday was not a legal strategy at all. There's no trying to understand this as a legal strategy is pointless. That's not going to actually work. What was happening yesterday was a distraction sideshow that was orchestrated by Trump to get people like you and me talking about his antics as opposed to talking about his fraud. And it's really not aimed, of course, at us. It's aimed at his followers. Mm-hmm. It's aimed at his supporters. He's aimed at the mainstream press. It's aimed so that everyone is talking about him. Everyone's talking about how aggrieved he is. Everyone's talking about how much he hates the judge and thinks the judge is unfair, when instead you have overwhelming evidence that he engaged in fraud.
Yeah.
Essentially, his legal team laid down in this entire litigation. He took the fifth over 400 times. And that's what we should be discussing, is that this guy's a big-time fraudster as opposed to discussing the sideshow.
Renato, that was one of my main questions for you about the fifth, because you tweeted Donald Trump's testimony today is not moving forward a purely legal strategy. His legal team's strategy was always defensive and focused on limiting liability elsewhere, which is why he took the fifth hundreds of times in his deposition. You don't frequently take the fifth in a civil case if you plan to win. Trump's team likely saw the need to essentially concede defeat here and mitigate collateral damage coming from a loss, but Trump's ego has forced a change in strategy. So explain that to us, that he took the fifth in the deposition, but he clearly didn't seem like he was helping himself by talking yesterday, right?
Right. So, all right. In a criminal case, when you take the fifth, it can't be used against you.
Right.
In a civil case, it can. So if for example, you sue me and then in the deposition you ask me, Renato, did you commit fraud? And I say, well, I take the fifth. Well, actually, the judge or jury, depending on who's deciding the case, is allowed to infer that my answer would have been negative for me, would have hurt me. You could take what they call it an adverse inference, because in a civil case, it can be used against you. So taking the fifth 400-something times is a problem for him in the civil case. So why did he do it? Well, if you remember at the time, that there was some concern that the Manhattan DA was deciding whether or not he was going to indict this case. And there was a book written about it and a lot of complaining and tomatoes that were thrown back and forth between former Manhattan DA, special prosecutors and so on about whether or not this case should have been indicted criminally.
Right.
So his lawyers, I think, had a serious concern that this guy was waiving his Fifth Amendment right to taking questions and actually fielding answers in a deposition, that he might hurt himself.
Right.
Now that's sort of, beside the point. And Trump's like, I don't want to lose. I'm not going to take this sitting down, and I'm gonna fight. And so he gets up there.
Right,
and,
this was like the coup after he lost the election. This was his own personal, legal launching a coup. He's screaming at the judge. He's screaming at the AG. You pointed out, Renato, you said you don't attack the judge constantly if you want to win the trial. The primary focus today is about PR spin politics. Trump wants to convince his followers the trial's rigged, that he's the victim, not a fraudster. Secondarily, this is the important part, Renato. You said he's trying to provoke the judge. Right, and you said it could bear some legal fruit, but it's doubtful it'll bear much, given how outrageous the behavior of Trump and his lawyers have been. This is just more spin. Trump wants the judge to do something unwise in order to use it as proof of his attacks. So at one point, Renato, when he was going on and on, the judge is saying this isn't a political rally, answer the questions, and then he did say, I will shut you down and just take every bad inference I can. I mean, so he Could he have done that? What are they trying to get the judge to do is my question.
Something like that. I mean, they were trying to get him to do one of two things. Either shut Trump down so then he could say, I was silenced. They wouldn't even let me speak at my own trial. Right? Okay. Or, have some offhand, off-color remark that, they could use or twist to say that there's bias. Right. The judge was wise to just let him keep talking. If I was the judge's law clerk, I'd say just sit there and listen. It's almost like the analogy I would use is if your kid is spouting off and mouthing off to you because, she's mad that you're not letting her whatever, right? Take the car, or she has to clean her room. She's spouting off. At the end of the day, getting into an argument with a child is almost like bringing yourself down to their level. Let them burn it off, all their anger, and at the end of the day, you're in charge.
Right.
So, have a worse penalty at the end. Okay, now you're grounded for 2 weeks or whatever,
Right.
And that's, I think, what the judge would be wise to do here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like 1 week, okay, now it's 2. Keep going. You said his lawyers are going along with this to ingratiate themselves with Trump. It's unethical and imprudent, but they've clearly picked the path already. None of this will impact the result of the trial, which will be disastrous for Trump. The evidence can't be ignored. I mean, the documents can't be ignored. And yet there's Alina Habba saying, you can't tell me to sit down. I'm like, have you never watched a court show ever or been in a courtroom?
Right. Sure. Yeah, well, the funny thing is she was saying, I think on television, like, this is a First Amendment issue. And it's like, well, if you've ever been to a court, the judge is often going to tell witnesses what they can or can't say.
Right.
Like, objection sustained or whatever, right? Shut down testimony. That happens in every trial. It's just, look, she's not a very experienced lawyer, not a very experienced trial attorney. But I think what I was trying to get at when I was writing what I did.
Yeah.
Is that it's a mistake to try to think of this as from a legal perspective, because a lot of people are sitting there talking about the legal strategy. I would be put on television. I was on television several times yesterday, and I was asked things like, what's the strategy of his legal team? What they're doing yesterday, what they were doing was not practicing law. What they were doing bears absolutely no resemblance to what I do when I go to trial for my clients.
Yeah.
Okay, they're not trying to shape their testimony. They're not trying to move forward an argument to win. They're sitting there and praising some guy who's attacking the judge, which they shouldn't be doing under Rule 8.2, Rule of Professional Responsibility. They should not be. They should not be enabling him to disobey the judge's rulings, and they should not be telling him to disregard the judge's rulings. But they're just sitting there and doing that and essentially clapping and cheering for a guy who's basically trying to create fodder for his fundraising emails. That's what was going on yesterday.
I mean, and can you explain the attacking his clerk? I've never heard of this, from Trump to the lawyers, so that he's had to leave this gag order in place. I've just never. Is that a tactic that you've ever seen used before?
Well, no. I mean, it's not a tactic that anyone who actually wants to win a lawsuit would use.
Yeah.
And it requires a lot of power. In other words, a common criminal is not going to attack the judge's law clerk. It's just going to get him in a lot of trouble. But what he's doing, he's picking on a woman. Yeah. Okay, versus picking on a white guy, all right, an older white guy. So that's the first thing. He's picking on a younger woman.
Yeah.
Second of all, she had a photo online with a Democratic politician. And one thing we've learned from social media is how images and videos and so forth can be used to distort.
Yeah.
And that's really what it was. I view it as disinformation. And the reason I said, well, this could be politics or spin or PR is like, look, I'm not a disinformation expert, but I am a legal expert, and I can tell you this is not law. This has nothing to do with law or legal strategy. It's something in that other vein.